This episode is brought to you in part by Richmont Graduate University. The field of mental health counseling is growing rapidly. Richmont Graduate University can equip you to become a licensed professional counselor, integrating your faith into your clinical practice. Programs are offered in Atlanta, Chattanooga, and online. Apply today at richmont.edu.
And so at that time, I was incredibly lonely. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no guidance, no do this, don't do that. I was thrown into the deep end. And so I really had to learn how to manage life on the road without getting so stressed that I became ill. Because that did happen. I was hospitalized at one point just from exhaustion and stress and like doing too much on my own.
This is Where You're From, an origin story podcast at the intersection of faith and culture that digs into the influences and experiences that shape who we are today. Join us as we gain insight into the Bible's wisdom for all, regardless of where we're from. Hey y'all, this is Rasul Berry. Thanks for joining me on Where You're From. This week, I want to share my conversation with Moriah Smallbone. Mariah is a Mexican-American Billboard charting recording artist, actress, and producer from Los Angeles, California. Her film credits include the lead role in Because of Gracia and Bathsheba in the hit series The Chosen. She co-produced the feature film Unsung Hero and is one of the dynamic co-hosts of Unshakeable Moxy, a new video series highlighting the resilience of courageous women released by Our Daily Bread Ministries. You can find out more about Mariah and Unshakeable Moxy by clicking the links in the show notes or by visiting whereyou'refrom.org. That's whereyafrom.org. Please join me as I ask Moriah Smallbone, where you're from.
I'm from Chino, California. I just want to say shout out to the 909. Hey.
Is that near like Chino Hills where the Ball brothers played?
Now listen, Chino Hills is one side of Chino.
Okay.
Chino Valley is another side. And I grew up in Chino Valley. So every time we drive past the Chino Hills, nice houses, it'd be like, oh, Snoop Dogg lives there. But not us. Yeah, Chino is a really special place. And the longer I have lived in Nashville, the more I have come to appreciate where I grew up, how I grew up. Chino is a suburban, primarily Hispanic, on the outskirts of LA, kind of on the edges of the inside kind of culture, very diverse. The demographic is really different based on economic background, ethnic background. You've kind of got it all. And I love that, like, you know, my first little crush, Salam Adilbi, was a Muslim boy. And then I like dated a Mormon in junior high. And then it was like all over the place. But it's like when you're so close in proximity, you're doing life with everyone. You're taking field trips to Buddhist temples and learning about the history and the cultures of the people around you. So I'm thankful for that.
Nice. And you mentioned it was a predominantly Hispanic community. What's your background?
I'm Hispanic. So 3 out of the 4 of my grandparents were from Mexico. My mom's parents were born in Juarez, Mexico, which is right on the border of El Paso, Texas. And then my father's parents, his dad was from California, and then his mom was born in California but raised in Sonora, Mexico. So, you know, a lot of my grandparents, they received a 6th grade education and then went straight into the workforce and worked in factories, worked in fields, worked construction. And sometimes it's incredibly liberating and exciting to feel like I stand on the shoulders of such giants. Other times it's such a heavy load to feel like, oh my gosh, I better make the best of my life. I better make the best of what I've been given, because look at the sacrifice of where I came from. I'm incredibly lucky. incredibly lucky.
Oh, that's such an inspiring story. So how did your parents meet?
At the club. At the club.
You could find them at the club.
My dad was in law school, and my mom had just moved to California. She was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, that border town. And she was living in a little trailer, borrowed her friend's red dress and went to this dance party, and my dad was playing bass in the band, and he caught eyes at her and kind of swept her off her feet. So that's at least how it started. At the end, it's my mom who really was the one who tied the knot.
Okay. So like when you think back about your time in Chino, like give us a picture of what that looked like for you growing up. What was the struggle like?
Yeah. My dad was the first in his family to go to college. He went to UCLA. And I would say both of my parents were pioneers in their family, both with their work or, in my mom's case, really learning the English language, you know, becoming independent as a woman in her 20s, being able to provide for herself. Both of them were the first in their family to prescribe to the Christian faith and to just make a lot of cultural lifestyle changes. So when I look at that, you know, I feel like it's really my parents who navigated the struggle that often comes with breaking generational chains, be that lifting yourself up out of poverty or choosing, in my mom's case, to be a stay-at-home mom and to homeschool. Like no one had ever done that in her family. All of this is so fresh for me because I just went back to El Paso with her and spent a lot of time, you know, driving through her childhood neighborhoods and driving the route that she walked to school as a first and second grader. And I'm just like, I can't believe you're allowed to do that. And, you know, she didn't have time. Yes, there was no money for her to do extracurricular activities, but there was no time. Both her parents worked. She had to take care of her siblings. They didn't have transportation, so they had to walk everywhere. It's like there was no extra time to create, to do extracurricular activities. And so when I look at my particularly high school years, I look at the time that I was given to be in basketball all 4 years, to be in leadership classes, to be activities commissioner of the school, you know, to be in the AP classes and get tutoring. And, you know, at the time, I don't think I appreciated it. I don't think I appreciated her. I don't think I appreciated their sacrifice. But, you know, I'm older now. I moved away when I was 17. I had about 7-8 years living in Nashville and kind of building my life on my own as an artist, and then getting married and building a home out here. And then my father was diagnosed with cancer a few years back. And so we called him and were like, hey, can you retire early from your career being a judge? Because it's killing you, obviously. And, you know, the LA court systems are no joke. And can you just come move out to Nashville and like build a house with us? So we built a house together. This room that you see here, this, you know, is part of the house that we built together. And so my husband and I are on one side of the house. My parents are on the other side of the house. We're connected by a 20-foot breezeway, and we do life together. And I'm so thankful for that because, again, it just helps with that retrospect of looking back and going, oh my gosh, there's so much I didn't know and appreciate.
Let me actually take a moment to kind of rewind, because there were a couple things. You said 3 of your 4 grandparents were born in Mexico.
So 2 were born in Mexico.
Oh.
1 was born in California, raised in Mexico.
Got it. Okay. And so the one who's the judge, was he one of those, or was he?
Judge is my dad. So his mom is Mexican. Yes.
Got it. And
then his dad is from California.
Got it.
I think they trace his ethnicity back to like French or Italian or something.
So like growing up, what were aspects in your home, if I were to go back in time to see aspects of how those cultures kind of showed themselves in the home?
Well, unfortunately, we were not allowed to speak Spanish in the home. And that's a pretty common thing for people who can trace their roots back to Mexico. There's this fear that your kids are not going to learn English and they will be behind in their education. And so even though Spanish is my mother's first language and my dad is a fluent Spanish speaker as well, we weren't allowed to speak it at home. So I learned Spanish in school by listening to music and having conversation with family members outside of the home. But I think there was and is a bit of a cultural wrestle that I feel like my sister and I, you know, we're on one end of the spectrum and my mom might be on the other end of the spectrum of like, we're proud to have a Mexican background and we want to go to Mexico. We want to spend as much time with our Mexican relatives as possible. And my mom, I think she had so many traumatic experiences when she lived in Mexico City because she did live there for some time before she moved to California. My mom is a great cook, but we did not have Mexican food every day, unfortunately. Unfortunately. My sister and I both had quinceañeras, which are birthday parties for girls, mainly in Hispanic, Latin cultures, where you turn 15 and it's this real coming of age. There's a lot of ceremony and ritual. You have your padrinos, which are your older family members that kind of help sponsor it. They do different ceremonies with you. They switch your sneakers out with a high heel. You know, you get a crown, you get a little ring. Like it's so beautiful. It was really special. I still have my dress and I'll probably keep that forever and pass that down if I ever have a daughter.
Okay. So you mentioned music was another point. You know, I saw somewhere that you have had a love affair with music since a very young age. When do you first remember discovering music and being like, oh my gosh, I love this?
That's a great question, Rasul. Very great question. My dad, being a bass player, I think is one of the greatest gifts that I was ever given. He was essentially a jazz, funk, R&B snob. If it wasn't Chaka Khan, if it wasn't Al Jarreau, if it wasn't Earth, Wind and Fire, we were not playing it in the house. And if there was any like religious type of music being played, it was from his band. Like he had a band at the church and they had like a perk section. It was very like merengue salsa. Like it was just so musical. And I'm super thankful for that. I think some of my earliest memories are of him playing in his church band, which again, looking back, when he was a public defender, there was not money to go around. There was not a lot of spare time. He would drive all the way from downtown LA to Chino at the end of the workday, which is when there's traffic, it can be up to a 2-hour commute.
Wow.
And he would still go to band rehearsals at church on Wednesday nights and then play services. And they would go out and play like at coffee shops. And I know that took a lot for him to invest in that. But I look back at like going to those concerts at coffee shops and dancing and feeling that rhythm and seeing their lead singer, Clara, and singing harmonies with her from the audience and just developing that ear and that love of music from a young age. It's those early concerts with his band that I look back to as really the beginning of the spark of the love affair with music, as you put it. Gotcha.
And in that, too, you reflected in the past about how that became almost your introduction or connection with God as well in terms of worship. Tell us about, you mentioned your parents had made this significant shift in terms of their family story and really coming to faith. When did that become something, that you embraced yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people, and I know it's different for everyone, but I believe in inviting the Spirit into your heart every morning. To me, it's not like a one-time invitation.
Right.
And then bada bing, bada boom, everything's different after that. Like to me, it's daily. So that's very congruent with my experience growing up. Like I went to church because I had to as a kid. I didn't have a choice. I volunteered to sing with a little kids church where you bring your guitar and kids are just throwing Cheetos at your face and, did that. Part of that probably because it just felt like the right thing to do. Part of it because I just wanted an excuse to keep learning songs on my guitar. I don't know that my heart was fully in it. I think the thing that's interesting now to look at is there's this conflict that often happens where people are so afraid of ego being somehow mixed in with how you spend your time at a church. Like if you're on the dance team for church, are you doing these movements out of just selfish ambition? You just want to perform, or are you doing this unto the Lord? Or are you singing this song because you're really in a worshipful state of mind? Or are you just thinking about yourself, and how people are looking at you? And I'll be the first to say that for me, it's always been a mix of both. I don't think there's ever a moment where I can be 100% pure-hearted, like, oh my gosh, all I care about is God being glorified in me right now. Like, likely, I'm probably thinking about, am I about to play the wrong chord? Like, that chord sounded terrible. Or like, did I even hit that note? Like, I held that out too long. Or like, who's that guy in the audience, especially in high school? Is that cutie looking at me? Is that cutie looking at me? like it's a blend of both. And I think if we wait to do something until our hearts are perfectly pure, we won't do anything.
That's such a good word. And I loved how you framed earlier about mind, body, and spirit coming together, because that's the reality. The fact of the matter is that the scriptures do tell us to play skillfully. So yeah, I totally feel what you're saying, that, and the honest truth of the matter is that we're complicated. So we're always a mixture of those things. So it sounds like you kind of really immerse yourself in this spiritual context, really from an early age, you being sensitive to the Spirit. You also mentioned you had some siblings. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, I have an older sister named Bianca and a younger brother named Anthony.
And so you're the middle child.
I'm the classic middle child, Rasul. I am keeping the peace. I am bringing the people together. I'm the diplomat.
And the performer.
And the performer. I mean, I don't know. I would say my sister was always much more out front than I was. I was the background singer. I was her harmonizer. Okay. I was her hype girl. And I was very happy to be in that support role. And it was really only when she decided she didn't really want to give much more time to singing that I felt like I could step forward a little bit. I've had to really work at being comfortable in the spotlight.
Got it.
I've had to work at being confident on a stage. And that's just come from saying yes to shows and putting myself in an environment where I'm being stretched and I'm nervous and I'm throwing up because I'm so anxious and doing a show anyways.
Yeah, no, that's great. Now, I know you mentioned having a love for music early on, but that wasn't your first goal or desire to be a musician, though, was it? What was?
I think I always had a hope, like a hidden hope that I could work in music somehow. I'd been writing songs since 6th grade, but you have to understand, like, the environment that I was in, the culture that I was in, your parents sacrificed so much for you. College is such a big deal. I had worked so hard in school. I had earned a scholarship to go to a university out in California. You don't just say, oh, I want to be a singer. You know, when you're a senior in high school, you know, ready to make that leap, and everyone's like, wow, you've worked so hard in school. What college are you going to? You know, what are you going to study? It's like, for me, I think the safest bet, the most familiar space would have been the legal profession, like to be a lawyer, to follow in my father's footsteps. You know, I think that could have worked. I think that would have worked. I think I would have been a great lawyer. I did, you know, programs in high school that I would go with 49 other students throughout the country and do these like law intensive camps. And I think I would have been great at that. But I don't think I would have been creatively fulfilled. And not that it's all about just being fulfilled. I think it's about doing the thing that so many things align for you to be able to do it. So like, you know, I remember calling my dad at one point when I lived out in Nashville on my own and just being like, record sales were not what they were supposed to be. You know, I felt like I wasn't inspired. I was touring nonstop, barely making ends meet, some days eating, some days not, living in people's basements. And I was just like, Dad, when you were in law school, how did you find the passion to stick with it, to keep going? Because I know that was a stressful time for you. And he started laughing. And I was like, oh my gosh, why are you laughing? And he was like, passion for law? He was like, girl, I was just trying to put food on the table. And it put things in perspective for me of, oh my goodness, it's not all about chasing your passions, but generationally, I believe that parents make a way for their kids to pursue certain things. Like, I have been given too much to not pursue music with my whole heart. And I love it and I enjoy it. And it's how I see the world. And writing songs is how I interact with people and things. And it's how I process emotion. Like, writing songs is like breathing for me. So it's a beautiful thing to be a part of, but people don't always see, you know, the behind the scenes part where you're trying to get record deals, you're trying to get funding, you're trying to build your team, you're trying to get your music out into the world. And in those moments when you're tired or you're discouraged, you have to hold on to something that's greater. And I think, to me, holding on to God showing me, look at your family, look at your legacy, look at where you're from, and take that and let that be your motivation to keep going, because this is not about you. This is about the sacrifice of your parents, and your parents.
That is such an important word, because I think sometimes passion can become a prison for this sense of expectation of what we should be doing vocationally. But it's okay to have a passion that doesn't turn into a job. You see this all the time, you know, with even athletes. You get an injury and it's like, what happens when I'm not able to live that out? And this idea of being able to still live out calling, which calling is completely broader and bigger. It's more about like, how do I participate in what God is doing in the world with where I am? And I think that can give so many people a settledness and a peace when it doesn't line up, that what I'm passionate about doesn't pay the bills.
No, I think you're so right. And I think we're such a purpose obsessed culture, right? Like, we want to find our purpose, but sometimes I wonder if it's way more simple than that. Sometimes I wonder if it's just like, how can you help the world around you? Yeah. How can you help the people around you?
Yeah, that's dope. So, all right, you get exposed to music at an early age. You get to see your dad, playing bass. I mean, I don't know if there's anything more perfect than growing up with a bassist playing jazz, R&B, funk. Like, you're getting all the great notes and all the great chords in that. So, but you get in that space, and then you mentioned sixth grade, that was something in which it kind of deepened for you. What happened in sixth grade? I'm just saying sixth grade. What comes to mind?
Sixth grade. What comes to mind? I'll say this. I would never want to die and come back a girl in sixth grade. I mean, sixth grade was such a potent time in my life. So potent on every level. You know, if you've got relationships, family, physicality, you know, your place in this world. Like, I'm 5'10". I hit probably 5'8" when I was in sixth grade, and I was like a foot taller than everyone. All the boys were looking up at me like this, and I was like, I really want to like dance with them, but they're not going to want to dance with me because I'm too tall. That was a bust. You know, family. I was at the worst point in my relationship with my sister. We were just so combative. It was so competitive, so much hurt between us that I felt like I didn't have a safe place in my home. You know, that my understanding of like spirituality was very wrapped up in community. I needed a safe space. I needed friends and a place to be where I could feel accepted. And I think in that time, I really started to find acknowledgement and acceptance for a lot of who I wasn't. So I wasn't going to hook up with that guy at that party. I wasn't going to lose my virginity. I wasn't going to get wasted that night. I wasn't going to do all these things. And therefore, I was Mother Teresa. I was Christian. I was a wet blanket. I was all these things. And you know, in school, at home, I felt really small and silly for being those things. But at church, in my little youth group, I felt like I was right at home. I had a place to be. No one was judging me. In fact, I was being celebrated for the decisions I was making. And looking back, I don't judge myself for that. I don't judge anybody in that situation, because belonging is so important. And where you find that belonging, you know, if you can't find it at home with your siblings, if you can't find it with friends in school, church is not a bad option. You know, and I think at that time when you're developing, and for me, learning how to lead people with music in that time frame in a safe environment. Like, I think it's why so many musicians that I love, so many diva singers that I admire, you know, they grew up singing in church. It's like, you might not fit in all these other places, but there might just be a place for you and for your gift in a place like a church. And I don't know, maybe that's stuck with me somehow, because I continue to feel like I don't fit in a lot of places, but it makes me that much more eager to find the place where I'm needed. I want to go where I'm needed. I want to sing and offer my songs and my music in an environment where, like I said, it's going to help people. It's going to lift people up. I want to go where I'm celebrated, not tolerated. So I think that really happened in that time frame.
When we come back, Mariah will share how she wound up in the hospital as a teenage traveling musician, and how she found recovery through the power of the word no. That's coming next on Where You're From.
This episode is brought to you in part by Seattle's Union Gospel Mission. Over 13,000 people in the Seattle area are homeless. Kathy is one of many who found a new life through Seattle's Union Gospel Mission.
Growing up, my dad and I didn't get along. I kept running away from home until one time I was assaulted. After that, I carried a lot of pain inside of me, and I was doing a lot of drugs. I became homeless. It's taken me almost 40 years to get the healing I needed, but all along, God was looking out for me. He led me to the mission, and the mission has helped me in all kinds of ways. I've learned how to set boundaries and say no. Now I'm looking forward to working for the mission. I want people to know there's hope out there. God can help you heal.
And grace will lead me home.
To hear more, volunteer, or donate, visit ugm.org.
Hey y'all, before we get back to my conversation with Moriah Smallbone, I want to share a quick teaser from our next episode with Jermaine Wilson. This is Where You're From.
Man, it was a very, very emotional time because during the time my parents was up visiting me, the guards came over to my mom and said, you have an emergency at your house. My mom got on the phone and they said somebody was dead at our house. And that's when I realized my sister just had committed murder.
Mm-hmm.
And so now my brother's locked up, my sister's locked up, and I'm locked up. And find out this news while they're visiting me.
Now let's get back to our conversation with Moriah Smallbone on Where You're From.
Okay, so, you mentioned graduating and expectation was going to college. Was there a tension between these two drives at that point? Like, okay, obviously law, my dad's a judge, that's a acceptable kind of safe occupation, but yet my heart is maybe calling out for music. Were those things at tension by the time you got to college?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Again, I got to bring it back to my parents. They're the GOATs. They really are. I think having a father who loved music and saw that I had these opportunities in Nashville really helped because he was so supportive of me letting go of my scholarship, not going to college, and moving to Nashville.
Wait, hold on. So you get offered scholarships to go to college. So at what point did your mind change and walk away from that? Walk us through that.
I was in my final months of my senior year of high school.
Okay.
And I had already accepted the scholarship. I had accepted a letter from a school called Cal State Fullerton. I had joined their honors program. I'd done freshman orientation. I was ready to go. I had my laptop. I had my books. I was ready to go to school. And towards the end of my senior year into the summer, I started making trips out to Nashville, and I met this wonderful family, the Green family. Wendy Green was in a band called Sierra in the 90s and early 2000s, and her husband was the music director for a singer named Stephen Curtis Chapman. And
the legend.
The legend, yes. Yeah. And so they were very inundated in the Christian music industry in Nashville. And I met them out in LA. Their kids did acting. We connected. And Wendy Green is a bit of a fire starter. She really helped Miley Cyrus at the beginning of her career land that Disney show, and the rest is history. So she's just a very pioneering, aggressive woman. To this day, she's a prayer partner of mine. She's just a wonderful woman. So I started staying with this family in Nashville, Tennessee, and writing songs and doing demos. And Wendy just had this gut instinct that she needed to help me get a record deal. And once things really started moving in that direction and there was opportunity, it was crossroads time. It was like a fork in the road. It was, do I accept this scholarship and go to school, or do I make a hard left and move to Nashville and start my career as a musician? So like I said, my father was super supportive. My mom struggled. She really struggled because college for her and in her family is so important to this day. It doesn't matter if you've got a Grammy, an Oscar, do you have a college degree is really what matters. It was harder for her, but in the end, she was supportive as well. And to their credit, they sent their 17-year-old out into the world of Nashville. I started touring right away, signed with a record label, and started that path. And man, the further I look back on that era, the more I'm like, that was a little crazy.
That's incredible to have parents that supportive to help you, kind of be unleashed and launched into your dream. And then to have this person of peace in Wendy Green that kind of helped support and nurture that. It really does seem like you talk about steps being ordered, right? So you're in Nashville, you're late teens, doing this process. How does that go for you? And what's kind of a milestone moment for you in that season?
I would say that completing my first record was a milestone moment. Just holding a CD in your hands and that feeling of like knowing all of the people and the work and the hours that went into making that. I remember that moment. I think going out on tour, it's harder for me to talk about that only because that was such a stressful period. That was such a hard time. You know, you're 17, 18, you have no family around, so no family structure, support, no friends. I wasn't home for long enough to find friends or make friends. And opening these shows as an artist by myself with like a ukulele in an arena of like 8,000 people, 10,000 people. And like, I know that now as an adult, or maybe for someone listening in their current situation, they'd be like, oh my gosh, that'd be a dream come true to sing in front of all those people. But you have to understand, I was scared. I had stage fright. I didn't have anybody to process any of that with or experience any of that with. And so my days would look like waking up on the bus, going and setting up, dragging my merch set up into a concourse, doing a sound check, getting changed, training volunteers at a merch table to sell my merch and go back, play some songs, try and squeeze in dinner in there, come back and say hello to people at a table and count out merch. And like, sometimes I'd just be like on the floor, like trying to crunch numbers and pack up my merch and, you know, thank volunteers and say hi at the same time. All of that, like, don't get me wrong. My grandmother was working in tomato fields at 3 a.m. So I know that this is a very different situation, but I also have learned that it's important to not compare pain, you know, like our pain is our pain. And so at that time, I was incredibly lonely. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no guidance, no do this, don't do that. I was thrown into the deep end. And so I really had to learn how to manage life on the road without getting so stressed that I became ill, because that did happen. I was hospitalized at one point just from exhaustion and stress and like doing too much on my own. And I had to learn what it looked like to confront the people that were around me that did have the opportunity to speak and to participate and demand what it was that I knew I needed. I mean, the first time that I said anything to create a boundary for myself was in the Vanderbilt hospital bed. And I called someone that I worked with and I said, I'm not playing another show until I have at least one human being with me. So that when I'm lugging my suitcase into the men's locker room in the dark basement of an arena, taking a shower by myself, that if anything happens, I have someone to call, or that the buses don't leave without me again. So that I just have someone to talk to, you know, someone to help be a shield or a partner, like out on the road. Like the road is not a glamorous place to be. And so I'm sad that it took so much out of me physically in order to get to that point. But I guess that's just what I needed. I needed to be taken to the end of myself to go, no more. If I'm going to be a young woman in this male-dominated industry, I'm going to have to learn how to stand up for myself. I'm going to have to learn how to have autonomy as an artist, how to make decisions, how to put my foot down. Because if I don't, I will be run over. And I cannot be 19 in a hospital bed from stress. That is ridiculous.
Wow. And it seems to add even more weight to the lyrics that you wrote that came after in your second album. No one ever told me this would be easy, but I never knew that it could be this hard. Oh, the worry, the worry, the worry is weighing on me. One of the things I'm curious about is it's one thing to exist in the music industry and to have all of those pressures. It's something entirely different when it's a Christian industry, which has at its kind of core the expectation that there is this spiritual nurture, this priority on who we are and being on mission. How did you navigate that? Like, on the one end, you're doing this for Jesus, right? Your first album is I Choose Jesus. You know, it's very clearly spiritual. And yet at the same time, you're also having to navigate through the very real struggles and weight of what it means to be human and set up boundaries and create a sense of protection against the industry in that sense. How did you navigate through that?
I think there's a difference between suffering and misery. And we can't avoid suffering. Life is going to be hard. Things are going to be disappointing. We are going to be mistreated. But how we choose to respond to suffering, I think it can grow our character. It can make us stronger, more focused, more empathetic. Suffering is not a bad thing in the end. Like when it's something that can be channeled into something that can help us grow. I think misery, it's almost like it can be avoided. Misery to me, and in my experience, I've been most miserable when I have forced myself to stay in a situation where I did not need to be there. And I think misery refuses to believe that we have any autonomy in our lives. And so I think in that time, what was really the difference between learning, okay, is this hard because it's supposed to be hard and I'm supposed to learn patience and endurance and long suffering and my faith is supposed to be strengthened? Or is this hard because I am literally in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people? When things are getting tough, when I'm making decisions, I have to step back and look at my situation and go, God, I can be stubborn and I don't want to stay in this place for a second longer than I need to. So if you're telling me to stick with this, and this goes back to what we were saying of like inviting the Spirit into my heart every single morning. It's the same question of like, okay, if I'm living in love, if I'm in that place where all that I'm doing is coming from a place of love, then is there the grace to keep going in this relationship, in this project, in this work, in this path? Or is it time to cut the cord? Yeah.
So when you did start to speak up and advocate for yourself in that way, how was that received?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I have very specific memories of like all the times where I have over the years been like, no, absolutely not. Because honestly, there's not that many like massive moments where I'm like, excuse me, Rodney, I feel like I'm being backed into a corner by you right now. And I do not appreciate that. I'm gonna need you to back up and I'm not going to do what you were trying to pressure me to do. And then like, I like put the phone on mute and I'm like, yeah! You did it, Mariah! Good job, girlfriend! You go. Oh my gosh, so funny. I have a few memories of, moments like that, but a lot of times it's a lot more subtle than that, I think. I think it's a lot more like noticing when I'm asking for approval on something that I don't need the permission to do, or just learning to trust my gut and my instinct a bit more. I think I check in more with that spirit of love. God, help me make a decision out of love. Let there be no room for fear. Push out the furniture of fear and take up permanent residence in my heart and tell me what direction to go. Like whatever direction here, sometimes it's not a right or wrong.
Yeah.
And then I lean on my team. Like, what do you guys think? Okay, I'm going to take that into consideration. I'm going to take that into consideration and then, make a decision.
as I hear you talk, I hear a well-earned, seasoned wisdom based on life experiences that have kind of caused you to see with clarity. So like Brave comes out 2 years later, right? You're still in Nashville at the time. Where are you at mentally, spiritually, at the time Brave comes out that might be different from your first album?
Yeah. Brave came out after I was married. Getting married was a big shift for me. I think it's a big shift for most people, but I think maybe some of that added dynamic came from the fact that I finally had family. Finally had family here in Nashville. Joel was and is my family. And I don't know, there's something about just having that groundedness, be it in being next door to your sister or living at your parents' house or being able to call up a girlfriend who's super close and lives around the corner. Like, I didn't have that for so long. And Joel, in a lot of ways, was just like a blessing. Still is, but was a big blessing for me I thrive in community. I thrive in collaboration with other people. And I was trying. It wasn't like I was cooped up at home, like not trying to make friends. It's like I had so many false starts in friendships and I was really trying, but I just couldn't link up with anybody. Like there wasn't that camaraderie and you can't force it. And so Joel not only came in as my family, as my husband, but as a producer on that record. He co-produced it. And it was the first time that I had been in writing sessions and production sessions and felt like my voice mattered, felt like my voice was being heard. I wasn't just being told to sing something. I was being invited to say something. And my husband, from day one, has been a bigger believer in me than I have in myself. Like he thinks I'm way more talented than I actually am. And he just held the door open for me. And I've always appreciated that, because from that point on, it really changed my expectation of the men that I was partnering with. I just needed to have a very real, tangible example of what it looked like for a man to come into my life and to see me as an equal and to see me as a creative with valuable ideas and to hold the door open for me and for those ideas. And after that, I was like, I'm not going back. If I'm sitting in a room with someone who thinks I'm less than valuable in this writing experience, why am I here? You know? So it's nice because I think in that record, there was a lot of healing. There was a lot of strengthening. There was a lot of, leaning into what does it mean to be brave in this season of my life. And I think my husband at that time, and still to this day, but especially at that time, like gave me so much confidence to just keep going. So
it sounds like you're just in a much healthier place, much more supported, and just being an equal in the producing process. How did you feel about Brave? I mean, it definitely had success, charting on Billboard charts and whatnot. How did you feel about it?
Oh, I loved it. I loved touring that record. At the time, I had an all-female band. Sometimes you have to swing the pendulum to find the balance. Right. And it was like I went from touring all by myself to, if I'm in a tour, I'm only touring with women. I was very sexist for a time. And I think I needed to be in order to heal and also realize that only working with women does not solve all of your problems. And it might even create some new ones. So don't be sexist. The men are important. We're good counterbalances for each other. But at the time, it was just fun. It was honestly a very fun record to tour. And that song, Brave, is still a song that I enjoy singing today.
That's great. So then one thing I noticed, you put out this project, Brave, and now you're doing the journey Unshakeable Moxy. Tell us about what it was like working on this project and why Unshakeable Moxy is something so important for you.
Yeah, I think the concept of Moxy is really attractive to me. And I think there's this important gap in between the Brave record and Unshakeable Moxy that I think really prepared me for it. And that is going away in 2020 and learning to write and produce on my own, not with, people that I was set up with through a label, not with my band, not with friends, not with my husband, but by myself. Who am I and what do I have to say when there's no one else in the room to filter it through? And I think the work that I did in those trips, to the Smoky Mountains on my own in a cabin or in my own office at home, really started to open my heart to learning what it means to be a woman of Moxy as I'm standing on my own 2 feet. And so when I read the pitch deck for this concept for Unshakeable Moxy, and I saw the different women that were listed as women to do stories on, women to interview, Lena, Bernice King, Ruth Cho Simons, Tony, I'm looking at these women and I'm just like, each of these women look like they are not only standing on their own 2 feet, they are sprinting on their own 2 feet. Like, who are these women and how can I learn from them? Because what they have is what I want.
This is Where You're From. I'm Rasul Berry, and remember, it's not just about where you're at, it's also about where you're from. This show was produced by Ryan Clevenger and Mary Jo Clark. I also want to thank listeners Dan Weiss and Giovanna Tolliver for their help in supporting and promoting Where You're From. Thanks, y'all. Where You're From is part of the Voices collection from Our Daily Bread Ministries.